If you stand on 6th Avenue in New York City, near 42nd Street, you will see a digital billboard that looms over the pedestrians like a doomsday clock. It is the National Debt Clock. The numbers blur by so fast they are a red streak of light. Every second, the number grows. Every minute, millions of dollars are added to the tab. As I speak to you right now, the United States government owes over $35 trillion. It is a number so large that the human brain cannot comprehend it. To count to 35 trillion, 1 second at a time, would take over 1 million years. It is a number that exceeds the total economic output of the entire planet combined. We look at this number and we shrug. We treat it like the weather, something that just is. Politicians ignore it. Economists tell us it doesn't matter because we owe it to ourselves. They tell us that as long as the government can print money, the debt is irrelevant. But they are lying to you. The debt is not irrelevant. It is a mathematical guillotine hanging over the neck of the global economy, and the rope is fraying. The truth, the one that no president, no central banker, and no mainstream media pundit will dare to whisper, is simple. This debt will never be paid back. It is mathematically impossible. The point of no return was passed years ago. We are now living in the final chapters of a sovereign debt bubble. And throughout history, from Rome to revolutionary France to Weimar Germany, every single empire that has reached this point has faced the same two choices. Option 1, hard default. The government admits it is bankrupt, stops paying bondholders, and the system collapses overnight. Option 2, soft default. The government prints the money to pay the debt, destroying the value of the currency and wiping out the middle class through inflation. Spoiler alert, they always choose option 2. Today, we are going to look at the math of the apocalypse. We are going to trace the history of sovereign defaults to understand what happens when a superpower goes broke. And we are going to explain why your savings account is the collateral for their mistakes. To understand the magnitude of the problem, we must look at the debt spiral. A debt spiral happens when the interest on the debt becomes so large that you have to borrow more money just to pay the interest on the money you already borrowed. It is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. In the 1980s, the U.S. debt was less than $1 trillion. Today, it is $35 trillion. But the scary part isn't the total number. It is the interest payments. For the last 15 years, interest rates were near zero. This allowed the government to borrow trillions for free. But when inflation struck in 2022, the Federal Reserve was forced to raise interest rates. Suddenly, the interest on that $35 trillion exploded. This year, the United States government will spend more on interest payments than it spends on the entire national defense budget. We spend more on interest than we spend on Medicare. We spend more on interest than we spend on children. Think about that. The largest line item in the budget of the most powerful nation on earth is not building roads or schools or tanks. It is paying rent on the money we already spent. And where does the government get the money to pay this interest? They don't have it. They run a deficit. So they have to borrow more money to pay the interest on the old money. This creates a compounding loop of destruction. The more they borrow, the higher the interest payments. The higher the interest payments, the more they must borrow. It is a mathematical death spiral. There is no exit. So, what happens next? To find the answer, we have to look at history. Because while the technology changes, human nature and basic math never change. Let's go back to France in 1789. The French Revolution wasn't just about bread, it was about debt. The French monarchy had spent itself into oblivion fighting wars, including funding the American Revolution. The king was bankrupt. The interest payments on the national debt were consuming half of the tax revenue. The new revolutionary government had a problem. They needed money, but they couldn't raise taxes because the people were already starving. So they decided to print their way out of it. They issued a new paper currency called the assignat. It was supposed to be backed by the land they had confiscated from the church. They promised they would only print a limited amount. It worked for a few months. The economy seemed to recover. People had money. Trade increased. The politicians patted themselves on the back. But the government couldn't stop spending. So they printed more assignats and more and more. As the supply of paper money exploded, its value collapsed. Merchants began hoarding goods. Farmers refused to sell their grain for worthless paper. The price of firewood and bread skyrocketed. The government tried to fix it with price controls. They passed the law of the maximum, making it illegal to charge high prices for food. The result, the shelves went empty. If a baker cannot make a profit selling bread, he stops baking bread. By 1795, the currency had hyperinflated. People were burning paper money to stay warm because it was cheaper than buying wood. The middle class was wiped out. The chaos led directly to the rise of a dictator named Napoleon Bonaparte. This is the pattern. Debt leads to printing. Printing leads to inflation. Inflation leads to social collapse. But the skeptics will say, that was France. That was 300 years ago. We are the United States. We have the world reserve currency. It can't happen here. This is the most dangerous lie of all. The belief in American exceptionalism when it comes to math. Math does not care about your aircraft carriers. Math does not care about your flag. In fact, having the world reserve currency doesn't prevent the collapse. It just delays it, making the final explosion much larger. Since 1971, when President Nixon ended the gold standard, the U.S. has enjoyed an exorbitant privilege. We could print dollars, and the world would absorb them because they needed dollars to buy oil. This allowed us to run deficits that would have destroyed any other nation decades ago. But that privilege is ending. The world is watching the debt clock too. China, Russia, India, and Saudi Arabia are quietly moving away from the dollar. They are settling trade in their own currencies. They are buying gold at record rates. They know that the U.S. debt is unpayable. They are building a lifeboat because they can see the Titanic is taking on water. So, how does this end? What is the Great Default? Most people imagine a default means the government walks out on the White House lawn and says, "Sorry, we aren't paying." That is a hard default. It is unlikely to happen. A hard default would crash the global banking system instantly. It would destroy the credit of the United States for a century. Politicians are too cowardly for that. Instead, they will choose the soft default. A soft default is when you pay back the debt, but you pay it back with currency that is worth less than when you borrowed it. Imagine you borrow $100 from a friend to buy a pair of shoes. 10 years later, you pay him back $100. But because of inflation, that $100 now only buys a pair of shoelaces. You technically paid your debt. You honored the contract. But in reality, you stole the value. This is the plan. This is the only plan. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury will conspire to keep interest rates lower than the rate of inflation. They will print trillions of dollars to buy their own debt. They will call it yield curve control, or quantitative easing, or liquidity injection. They use complex jargon to hide a simple crime: counterfeiting. They will flood the system with new dollars to pay off the old bonds. This will cause the prices of everything you need, food, energy, housing, insurance, to rise. They will not tax your income to pay the debt. They will tax your purchasing power. Inflation is a tax that no one voted for and everyone pays. It hits the poor and the middle class the hardest. The wealthy own assets, stocks, real estate, gold, which rise in price during inflation. The working class owns cash and wages, which lose value. The Great Default is not an event that will happen on a Tuesday in the future. It is happening right now. Look at the price of a home. In 1950, a house cost 2 times the average salary. Today, it costs 8 times. That is not the house getting better. That is the currency getting worse. That is the default happening in slow motion. Look at the price of a hamburger. Look at the price of a hospital visit. The government tells you inflation is 3%, but your lived reality tells you it is 20%. That gap between the official numbers and your empty wallet, that is the sound of the government defaulting on its obligations to you. The tragedy of the Great Default is that it breaks the social contract. When a society rewards saving and hard work, it thrives. When a society punishes savers by inflating away their money and rewards debtors who borrow recklessly, it rots from the inside. We are entering a period of financial repression. The government will force pension funds and banks to buy their debt. They will implement capital controls to stop you from moving your money out of the system. They will launch central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, to track and control every dollar you spend. They will do everything possible to keep the Ponzi scheme going for one more election cycle. But gravity always wins. So, what can you do? If the ship is sinking, how do you survive? You must understand that in a soft default, cash is trash. Holding paper currency is a guaranteed losing strategy. You are holding a melting ice cube. History shows that when an empire debases its currency, wealth flees to hard assets. Hard assets are things that the government cannot print. They cannot print gold. They cannot print silver. They cannot print productive farmland. They cannot print oil. They cannot print Bitcoin. These are the lifeboats. During the Weimar hyperinflation in Germany in 1923, the people who kept their money in the bank lost everything. A lifetime of savings couldn't buy a cup of coffee. But the people who owned a farm, or a factory, or gold coins, preserved their wealth. They survived the storm. We are not Germany in 1923 yet, but the math is the same, the trajectory is the same, and the ending will be the same. The $35 trillion debt will never be paid. It will be inflated away. Your savings are the fuel they will burn to keep the engine running a little longer. The Great Default is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. The only variable left is time. The clock on 6th Avenue keeps ticking. The numbers blur red. Most people walk past it, ignoring the warning. They think it's just a number. But now you know the truth. It is not a number. It is a countdown. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.